Hello and welcome to another episode of the Jewish People's Podcast. I'm your host, Sam Hyatt, stepping in for Yaakov Katz. Today, I'm so pleased to speak with my good friend Elica Le Bon, an Iranian activist who takes us through her work, standing up for her people and fighting back against the Islamic Republic. We also delve into how October 7th affected her. What was it about that day that made her use her platform to stand up for the Jewish people? The consequence she's faced from being vocal against anti-Semitism, and what, in many people's views, is the most perplexing phenomena of our time, the so-called Red-Green Alliance that would be the coalition between Western progressives and Islamists. Here we go. Elica Le Bon, welcome, and thank you for joining me on the Jewish People Podcast. How are you doing?
Samuel Joshua Hyde, thank you for having me.
Well, I'm very happy to have you on because I thought, we could let people in to one of those week after week, month after month conversations that we seem to have all the time on world issues and issues that relate to your community, the Iranian community, and my community, the Jewish Israeli community.
Yes.
I thought this would be a nice opportunity to give a little window into.
Should we tell them about the record?
We could tell them about anything, anything and everything. But I do want to just get into like a little bit of the basics. For those that don't know you, I mean, you got a lot of followers on social media, but for those that don't know you, I was thinking maybe you can give us a little bit of insight into the beginnings of your story as an Iranian activist. Where did that start? What was the budding scenario that kind of shifted your life into this trajectory?
I think for a lot of Iranians in the diaspora, a big shift came exactly 2 years ago tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be September 16th, which is the anniversary of the killing of Mahsa Amini, who was a young Kurdish Iranian woman who was killed in Iran for improperly wearing her headscarf. And I think that was kind of a tipping point for a lot of us in the diaspora to start speaking up about Iran, because I know that, people had previously asked me, why was this not an issue? And it's like, it's not that it wasn't happening, it just wasn't a part of public discourse. And for whatever reason, it came to the light at that point. And so I think a lot of us felt this obligation to kind of jump in and educate people about what was going on in Iran and kind of be the voices of the people that were in Iran, and they were, without internet because of suppression. Before that, I was doing activism, and I tell people this often that I was very left-leaning, and in the years building up to Mahsa Amini's death, in the years building up to this conversation around the Middle East, I could feel something was kind of changing in me, because some of the conversations that were being had in these kind of left-wing circles started to get a little bit extreme. And I think a lot of us, regardless of our participation in the discourse around the Middle East, started to feel this in some way. And so I think for me, the more I got into the Middle East, the more I felt like I had to distance myself from these circles that had a very extreme and warped view of things, particularly when it came to terrorism. And that's kind of what brought me here.
For sure. I mean, and ultimately that has led you into your position in October 7th and the discourse that you've been involved in, which that's really been at the center of what you've been trying to bring to light, since that tragic day. Speaking about terrorism, speaking about jihadism. I mean, me and you often speak about, when it comes to that, the kind of progressive left-wing alliance with Islamism that we're seeing forming, which people see as this peculiar and perplexing phenomena. But when you look deeper into it and you understand the kind of identitarian politics that has been going on for many, many years on the left, kind of this revolutionary ethos, let's say, one gets a clear insight that it's not just a mistake or naivety, that there's something deeper at play. But yeah, I just, again, for the people listening to this, October 7th is basically just after that is when we got to know each other. I can't remember exactly when it was, but we were put in touch by a friend, Matthew Nuriel. And you know, that's brought much joy into my life because we always engage endlessly on conversations I enjoy and fantastic conversations, I think. So, you know, tell us a little bit about what October 7th showed you, maybe that you hadn't seen
Mhm.
before. What did it bring
Yeah.
to light for you? What did that day mean for you? What did it bring to light for you?
So I think the reason that, even I mentioned coming from the left and the backstory of Iran and all of these things is because I think we have to consider all of these things holistically to understand any part of it, right? Um, because it's like that, whatever it is, that the sum is the all the parts of the whole. What is it?
Uh,
Whatever. Anyway,
I get you.
that thing. So there was this progressive movement, at least in my mind, what's happening for me at this time. That's like this side of things is becoming progressively more fringe and more out of touch with the reality. And then I think October 7th was the final stick that broke the camel's back for me, because it was like, I think before October 7th, there were periods of times where I was getting red pilled so hard because I would see, like, for example, when the hostage deal, the Biden hostage deal happened, where the Biden administration agreed to give $7 billion to the Islamic regime in exchange for hostages, which was an awful, objectively awful thing to do. You don't give money to terrorists. You don't negotiate with terrorists. This is just like the fundamental principles, right? And I remember seeing like Senator Chris Murphy and people like that just like tweet storming about how, this was such a good decision and this is all about diplomacy and we have to do diplomacy and we have to be friends with these regimes, and just thousands of Iranians in the comments being like, we hate you, shut up and stop paying the oppressors, right? And then him coming out with new tweets saying the only people who disagree with this decision are Iran hawks and right-wing Congress people. And it's like, you're lying. You are lying. You're
Yeah.
pretending to be these Democrats, these leftists, these humanitarians. You don't care about us. You are a liar. You care about your politics. That's all you care about. So I was being red-pilled kind of progressively. And then on October 7th, where I finally witnessed the entire left, humanitarian left turn around and put like pictures of paragliders,
Mm.
and, all hail the resistance, our martyrs and all of this stuff. I was like, oh, you guys are actually insane. Like,
Yeah.
you guys are actually insane. This is straight up and down terrorism. And if you don't have the moral clarity to see this for what it is, if you cannot see that this is terrorism, you better take all of those titles out of your bio about, humanitarian empathy, compassion. You don't have any of those things if you cannot see one group as human and these actors as bad actors. It's as simple as that.
Yeah, I mean, this I suppose will connect to both of the things in which you've spoken about. When I was reading a book just after October 7th about Foucault, the French philosopher, and it was around about maybe the time that we met. And it was speaking about his relationship with Iran at the time of the revolution and how throughout the French media, he wrote about this novel form of revolution on behalf of the Islamic Republic that he was seeing unfolding before his eyes. And he was fascinated by it and even termed it political spirituality. I mean, he thought he discovered something, but really what he discovered was, a mix of Islamism and Shiite martyrdom. But um, but nonetheless, we have seen this trend happening for a while. There's even in this book, there's a critique of him in this book where his rage doesn't come about when women in living under the Islamic Republic start getting persecuted, start having their rights stripped away, when anti-Semitism starts becoming systemic. It's when feminist exiles, Iranian feminist exiles living in France, where he lives, start calling him out. Then he's enraged by that and he accuses them of reinstilling Western prejudices and Islamophobia. Now, this is kind of the similar kind of mindset that you hear from already back in 2006 from Judith Butler, the gender theorist, who said
Oh my
Hamas was
God.
the movements of the socialist left. So there has been this trend among leading thinkers who
I
identify
call them white
themselves.
supremacists.
Yeah, exactly.
They're white supremacists. They're white supremacists. They tell Middle Eastern people how to live their lives, how their lives should be, that they and this is there's so many levels to their white supremacy. I mean, first of all, what they front as is saviors, right? They front as we're saviors, but you probably know that I often say that saviors and supremacists are the opposite sides of the same coin, because in both instances, they have absolutely no familiarity with us, our background, our culture, and they feel like they have the right to dictate our lives, our experiences, and what type of governments and regimes that we should live under. And ultimately, they always side with the oppressor. And the reason that they side with the oppressor is because of, their Western views that the enemy is capitalism, the enemy is the white man, right? And so therefore, they want to support everything that's the antithesis to that, which is, jihad, because jihad is the biggest threat to capitalism and the white man, right? And so what they're actually doing is, from their privileged Western warped worldview, they're supporting our oppressors because that is the enemy to the thing that they hate. Does that make sense?
For sure.
And so, they, and this is what is so frustrating to me, that people spent so many years, from the period of like 2020, at least, BLM, this kind of period of time, being like, oh, okay, we have to, listen to people of color, listen to people who are from the region, listen to people and not speak over them. And then after,
Positionality, I think it was called positionality, understanding one's position within the conversation, something like that. Yeah.
I have no idea, but whatever it was, then October 7th happens, or whatever, Iran. And they're like, why don't you educate yourself, okay, and read books by these European authors to learn about Iran? It's like, I think I'm going to be all right not doing that. But so what they do is that from this position, they speak over the people of the land that they're speaking about. And what makes them such supremacists, in the sense that, they're fronting as saviors, what makes them such supremacists is this underlying belief that in some way they have a superior understanding to the people with lived experience. And the only way that you could have such a belief person is sophisticated enough to understand their own experience. And so the only reason you would think that is because you think that your background, where you're from, who you are, the color of your skin, whatever, where you were educated, in some way makes you naturally superior. So I, as a naturally superior person, understand something that you, as a naturally inferior person, do not understand. And so when a person in that position says the things that they say, right, to people who are from that land, they're doing so from a place of supremacy. And that is what brings them back to being, to the horseshoe theory.
Yes.
Which is that the same people that are saying we hate white supremacists end up being the white supremacists themselves. That was a very long-winded way of trying to explain that.
Well, no, I always find it interesting when I hear you speak like this, and I think I've said to you many times, welcome to what it's like to be a Jew in the 21st century. The experience is very similar from our side when, the Jews are combating, essentially are the target and are being combated, are facing kind of the threats from both ends of the stick, from the white supremacist side as well as from, what could you call it, the anti-imperial left, let's call them. But you had a very
who actually support imperialists,
who at least behave like imperialists, let's put it that way, and definitely support imperialists in terms of the Islamic Republic, for sure.
And
Um,
its proxies.
exactly, and in terms of Hamas, that well, they fundamentally either do not have an understanding or they have a very good understanding and are indeed tapped into the basic impulses of that politics and essentially just support it. Um, so what I do want to shift onto is you just had an article that came out in Newsweek, and
Mhm.
I would love you to speak a little bit about what that article was and the reasons why you wrote it, and please give the people listening and watching this just a little bit of a
Yeah.
let's say a window into your experience over the last few months as an activist, speaking about Israel, speaking about the conflict, speaking out as a proud Iranian woman against the regime. There's been consequences, obviously, for you in terms of this.
Yeah.
And that's to say it lightly. That's to say it lightly. But I want to give you kind of really the opportunity to speak about that. So
Yeah,
take.
it's so funny because as you know, I've said to you recently, I've never really understood the experience of being Jewish so much as I do since these attacks, because it is the exact same theme of being obsessed with hating someone. It is the theme of being obsessed with creating lies about someone. It is the obsession with finding any lie that you can to use to hate somebody. And it's so bizarre. And you just think like, why are you so obsessed with hating me, right? And so, I've been saying to you, like, I finally understand the Jewish experience because I see that myself every day when I go onto Twitter, wherever I go. And it's like 9/11 was done by the Jews, the Holocaust was done by the Jews.
Yeah.
And I'm like, why are you so obsessed? What is your obsession? And so for me, it was after, so for a year after the Iran revolution kind of kicked off, everyone in the Iranian diaspora was obviously pretty much on the same page against the regime. And then after October 7th happened, so let me be clear, first of all, the majority of Iranians inside Iran get it. Like, they don't need to be told. They were the first ones to set fire to the billboards of Hamas that the Islamic regime was propping up. They were the ones in the football stadiums chanting like things that I can't chant because it's explicit, but cursing the proxies, let's just say that. So the people inside Iran understood. In the diaspora, it split. So half of them went one way, half of them went this way. And there were a lot of Hamas supporters in the diaspora. So there was this Palestinian girl who,
Can I just ask you something? Sorry, on that, because I've always just found that interesting. There's a lot of Hamas supporters, you were saying, that went one specific in that direction among Iranians in the diaspora. Now, do those Iranians tend to be regime sympathizers, or are they
so
anti-regime and kind of just confused on the topic of Israel?
exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So they were anti-regime and they were confused. I think a lot of them bought into the propaganda in the early days, because I saw like a lot of the comments that they were leaving. They were saying like Hamas's attack on October 7th was like a slave uprising and stuff like that. And I was like, oh, you just have no idea about anything if that's what you think.
Yeah.
Um,
Which is fascinating because of how not just technically and financially and politically linked the Islamic Republic is with Hamas, but ideologically, what they are at their core, what they
this
are
is the thing.
reaction to reclaim, the dominance that once was through kind of renewalism and all these different kind of movements that pop up at the end of the collapse of the art. These are the same, this is the same thought practice that's happening within these movements. So I've always found that interesting, that to on the one hand be able to see it so clearly, and then on the other hand be confused by it.
I don't think those people were ever the ones who could see it clearly anyway. Like, those people were never the ones that were in our kind of like Twitter spaces and like with the experts, with the academics. Like, I never met somebody who was, at that kind of level of intellectual sophistication who had went on that side of like supporting Hamas. But it was just very, very clear. It's like the Islamic regime in Iran created an Islamic Republic. Hamas wants to create a second Islamic Republic. Hezbollah wants to create a third Islamic Republic. Houthis want, like, and on and on and on. How do you not see that? How can you be against this Islamic? How can you be saying woman life freedom against the Islamic Republic here, but you're supporting the creation of a Islamic Republic pop-up store in different places? It just doesn't make any sense. But they couldn't see it. And that's why, you know, as I said to you, that we would get into this situation where for us who were clear-eyed from the beginning and throughout, we remained ideologically consistent, right? But for them, they started becoming ideologically inconsistent, and then so they would run into walls anytime they'd make arguments, because they wouldn't be able to be consistent with being anti-regime and pro-Hamas, right? So I don't know. I don't think that their arguments lasted very long, and that's why you don't really hear from them as
Yeah,
much.
for sure. So they're not very they're not very much out there. But sorry, to get back to your point about your
Yes.
article and what you've gone through, I want to give you the opportunity to speak about that.
So at that time, so this Palestinian girl created a video, and she was like, all of you Iranian girlies in freaking California better stop running your mouths about Hamas. They are our resistance. And then the Hamas supporters in the Iranian diaspora, who were all our friends, right? They all started reposting the video. And in the video, in the comment section, it was just doxing us. It was doxing me, my family, doxing my family in Iran, doxing Jewish people in California, doxing their families, their businesses. Like, here's the address of their like father's store in Beverly Hills. Go find them. Like scary stuff, you know? And these were the people that, I mean, they were our friends in real life reposting this. Like, good friends, like friends that like Matthew and I would like hang out with and go to events with and have dinners with. They were reposting these videos against us because I can't even explain it. I can't. It was like the brain rot, right? Like a virus had infected their brains.
It
So
tends
that's
to happen
when,
when the Jews are involved. People get people get very confused the minute the Jews people do get very ideologically inconsistent. Look at university campuses, right? The things that are being said about Jews in university campuses, I mean, it just would not be allowed. That's where my issue's been when it comes to, you know, calls for genocide and killing the Jews, and then people saying context matters. Well, context wouldn't matter if it was other people, right? So that's the thing, you know, it's not really a case of freedom of speech. It's a case of, would this speech be acceptable if it was anyone else, any other minority group? And I could almost bet my bottom dollar it wouldn't be. And that's kind of where I think we've seen a lot of issues come to the fore in the few months within academia, within left-wing circles, within activism. We've seen a lot of ideological issues that have come to the fore, that have laid things bare, that have been running under the surface for a long, long time, and that I think now require addressing. And you're the person to help us on that journey. So sorry, carry on
yeah.
with where you're at.
No, I mean, I say that like I had no idea how much people hated Jews until I started speaking up for them, you know, and it was like I think every single person should at one point in their life come out and publicly speak out against anti-Semitism to see what happens to you. Because it's only when you see what happens to you that you understand how bad this is, right? Like the people that are like, oh, anti-Semitism isn't real. It is the biggest form of bigotry on planet Earth. Single-handedly. Like there's nothing else that you can compare. It's so like insidious. It's so deeply buried. It's so intertwined in so many different ideologies, politics, countries. Like it is the most deeply insidious form of bigotry in the world. And unless you come out and speak against it, you don't know. You have to learn the consequences of what happens to you, what happens to your life when you try to defend Jews. And this is how bad it was that my content was so balanced, you know, it wasn't like aggressively taking a political stance. It was just like, hey guys, maybe we shouldn't say, let's gas the Jews. And people were like, you Zionist psycho, I hope that you die. I hope that your family, like,
Yeah, very intense, very intense.
And those people at the same time saying there's no such thing as anti-Semitism,
Hmm. Yeah,
you know?
100, yeah, yeah, yeah.
So that was my first experience of I don't know what you call it, vicarious anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
Well, let me go back and say that after October 7th, all of my friends blocked me. All of my friends that I grew
Welcome
up
to
with,
the
that I
club.
was, huh?
I said, welcome to the club.
Welcome to the club. Um, so my friend, my best friend since I was like 11 years old, like, I mean, my best friends, my closest friends who had known me my whole life, our families knew each other, blocked, just done. You know, they were like, there's something wrong with you for standing up for them. Bad.
But yeah, let's get into that just a little bit. What do you think that is? What do you think is so triggering to them about you standing up for the Jews?
So, first of all, London is a very anti-Semitic place.
Mm.
It is, so this is why I say anti-Semitism is so, I always say anti-Semitism is written in invisible ink. You can't see it, but it's there.
Mm.
A lot of the ideologies and the beliefs people have, and you understand this well, the way that anti-Semitism has been able to thrive so well is because it aligns itself with ideologies and soft spots that really trigger people in an emotional place. So if you're talking about a person from this community or that community or this community, you say, okay, Jews are just like white supremacists. Jews are just like slave owners. Jews are just like this. And you build this perception up for not just months, like years, decades, so that a person intrinsically understands that a Jewish person is the same as a slave owner, or just the worst thing that you can imagine. So that when in that final instance, someone comes out and says, I'm just defending Jews, they're like, you have taken the side of the biggest form of evil. And because they've been primed to think that way for so many years, you can't get through to them anymore.
100%. I mean, that is replace the word Jew with Israel, and that's what the campaign has been, to equate the state of Israel with every evil the world is, whether it's slavery, ethnic cleansing, genocide, apartheid, white supremacy, just about every label you could tack on that our society today, correctly, by the way, defines as evil, has been at some point methodically tacked on to Israel. So when it does come to something like October 7th, you will have people who respond, well, they had it coming,
Mhm.
right? And that's where it came from. This is a long-standing process, and it is very much a part of the anti-Semitism mechanism, if I can call it that. That's how anti-Semitism has always functioned. The Jews were the capitalists in the Soviet, communist Soviet Russia, and in Nazi Germany they were the communists, and the Jews are white supremacists, and they're also endangering the purity of the white race. And my favorite has been watching that Jews are responsible for the patriarchy, and then other people that Jews, through the creation of feminism, are seeking to undermine the family structure and the patriarchy. So just about anywhere you go, you really go, seem to find yourself as a target of what is identified as uncharacteristically evil in the eyes of that specific sect, which is actually, and I'm not making the equation at all, but that's actually what you've gone through in the smear campaign, which is what your article was on.
Mhm.
This is
Yeah.
what you've gone
And
through, the targeting from the regime. Do you want to just let us in on that?
yeah. I was going to say something really quickly because what was it? I just wanted to say that go. What were you just saying just before this? Because my mind was just like going in a million
No,
different
that's fine.
directions.
I was thinking about, the way in which.
Oh, I know what I was going to say. I know what I was going to say. Okay. So I often think because before, not before October 7th, like I'd say like a little bit before that, like maybe 1 or 2 years before that, when I was more on the other side of things, I always try to go back and think, like, what did I think then? And this is why this is so difficult, because there's like when people will say things like, oh, I was accused of anti-Semitism for just stating facts, right? They're like, it's just a fact that XYZ, that Israel, this. And it's like the reason that they don't understand where the anti-Semitism is because they don't understand that, and part of anti-Semitism is the revision of history. It is the revision. It is the alternative facts. It is cherry picking. It is taking things out of context. And so when I think of like, when I was more on that side, when I was completely on that side of things, and I would hear of something, or if I'd learn about something, it would be like, I never understood why. I'd be like, but why? But why? But why? And I felt like no one really ever explained it to me, right? But it was like just the framing of like, this Israel is the aggressor and it's always the aggressor. And so why would you take the side of the aggressor? And so I think part of the anti-Semitism is in this framing of like, you have the Jewish people who've been persecuted for the past, I mean, more than 2000 years, but at least, right? And persecuted in every part of the world consistently, expelled from their homeland, subjected to dimitude, minority, inferior status, and somehow throughout this history of persecution, building a theme around the fact that, but they're the aggressor, right? And this is the theme that lives on to this day. Like when they get kicked out of, I don't know, Iraq, right? It's because they're in the money. When they get kicked out of Germany, it's because blah, 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 right? And then up until this day, whatever happens in Israel, it's because of them. And so there is this natural theme of Israel always being the aggressor, or Jews always being the aggressor. And so when someone comes out and they're like, all I said was, right, facts that show Israel is the aggressor, how is that anti-Semitic? And it's like, you literally need like 2000 years of education to understand.
Yes. It's funny because whenever I make the argument, if I'm in some sort of panel discussion or whatever, even just a discussion with someone who doesn't agree with me on the anti-Semitism factor when it comes to Israel, and I bring it up, they always say, well, that's such an easy crutch to go to. And I always find that interesting from very, smart intellectual people to make that thing, because no, it's not a crutch. We're talking about a 2 millennia long, at least, experience that spread pretty much across every country, culture, people, religion, and continent, and has had some very, very consistent themes, and has mutated and adapted itself to suit the time. To understand that, and then to be able to understand it in the context of what we're experiencing now, is not a crutch, and it's not lazy. In fact, it takes a hell of a lot of work. It's the opposite of lazy. It takes a hell of a lot of work. And but I do want to, because we've got a few minutes left,
Okay,
talk
yeah.
what we need to. I just want to get, because I'm going to link it, by the way. I'm going to link your article
Okay.
into the
Yeah.
description, so that people can read it for themselves. But just give us a little bit of
Yeah.
a brief.
Okay, yeah. I'll go back to so that video came out with a Palestinian girl and everyone started getting doxxed. And then this account that mysteriously was created that day put in one of the comments that basically Elica's a spy for the IRGC and her dad works for the regime. So then this woman in Canada who had just been censured for promoting pro-Hamas propaganda, who then, I mean, it seems like she was fired and she basically told everyone that she voluntarily quit. She started spreading this rumor to everybody, and then like the pro-Hamas crowd started picking this up, and but then they turned the rumor basically into that I was a Zionist spy. So they
Yes,
started
you're
telling everybody.
simultaneously being a spy for the Mossad and for the IRGC, depending on who the audience is.
Exactly. And if you like look it up on Reddit and stuff, it'll be like she's a known double agent, sometimes triple agent, because sometimes they put the CIA in there. And so, but then what happened was that it's unclear when about the time that like the attacks started happening on like Twitter, where there was like, and this is the part where, you know, the regime agents come into play. So basically there would be like new accounts on Twitter every day, and there were like tons of them, and they all had like 0 followers, 0 following, and they would just start spreading the craziest things about me. They would like make up quotes about how, you know, I grew up in Israel and then I was lying about where I was from. They would make up this stuff about my family. They would make up, you know, there was one of them that said that this one, oh, and they'd go around WhatsApp groups. So they'd infiltrate WhatsApp groups as well. And they were like, they'd say things like, oh, she tried to go to Israel in January, but Elal cancelled her flight and they banned her from entry or something like that. And then when they found out that I actually went to Israel and they did a full background check on me and my entire family and let me in, then they were like, oh, they probably just knew she was a spy and they were
Yeah, then
keeping
it
an eye
meant
on
nothing.
her.
Yeah.
Yeah, or that she was, the reason they let her in is because she's a spy for Mossad. Um, so that was, so that started in the pro-Hamas crowd. And then there were some people even like in on this side of things that started spreading it as well. And then
That didn't matter anymore. You had your security
yeah,
check,
that
now
didn't
that
matter.
it's on that claim, that doesn't matter anymore. Yes.
Exactly. So then there was this account that was based in the Middle East, that claimed to have a team of Persian researchers on me, right? And it's like, who would be the team of Persian researchers that you're paying money to try and investigate me, yet you actually cannot find anything? 95% of Iranians are against the regime, right? So the only people that would be trying to tear me down are either the regime itself or agents of the regime or supporters of the regime. So that we know who your team of Persian researchers are, right? And so this account that was based in the Middle East claimed to have a team of Persian researchers about me, researching me. And they put up this video, and the whole video was just like complete junk. Like they were like, she said that, you know, her family were asylum seekers, but we found out that her dad actually voluntarily traveled to the UK to study. Yeah, no, right?
That,
Because you can't seek asylum outside of the UK. You
that,
have to be inside the UK
that,
to seek
that,
asylum, which is exactly what I had told people, which is that under the Shah's regime, my dad was sent to the UK to study, to get his PhD from Oxford. And then when the 1979 coup happened in Iran and there was a change of government, my dad had to drop out because his bursary was cut off and he had to seek asylum in the UK. So they would just take everything and just come up with any lie that they could think of to make me questionable, to then say that I was a Zionist spy. That was, I don't even know. I don't even know how I was a Zionist spy, but somehow I was a Zionist spy. But whatever
it's not
this
really
account
that these
was,
people ever reach their conclusions based on logics and facts. So it's very difficult to
well,
understand. It's not exactly like these people reached any of the conclusions that they've come up with in the smear campaign against you based on logics, evidence, and facts. So so there's almost no need to understand exactly how they got there. They got there because they reached for it, because they had this, obviously, this purpose, because they
yeah,
see your voice as a threat from whichever angle it was coming from.
yeah.
Um,
And I
but
say that I say that they have the Candace Owens disease, right? Because like Candace Owens disease is like, okay, so one thing that I learned from a therapist, which is just sounds so obvious that I don't even need to say it, but well, I would always ask my therapist, am I this, am I that? Like anything that's like, you know, she'd be like, no, 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 no. And I'd be like, am I crazy? She'd be like, no, you're not crazy. And then I'd be like, but how do you know that? And she was like, crazy people never question if they're crazy.
mhm.
Crazy people never question their reality. They are, you know, they can live in a world where nothing, absolutely nothing makes sense. It's based on absolutely nothing. There's no reason to think or believe something. Everybody in the world has a, you know, different understanding, but they're still convinced that they are the only one person who sees the truth and everybody else is crazy, and they never even question it. They never even question, could I be wrong? Should I investigate? They're like, I am 100% right without question. I don't have to question myself, and I never will. Right? This is the Candace Owens disease. Jews definitely caused the Holocaust. I will never question myself. I will never investigate because I know for a fact that I'm right and the entire world is wrong and the entire world is crazy. These are the way that these people think, right? Nothing makes sense. Absolutely nothing is aligned with the reality that they have in their heads, but they're like, I must be right because I think it, therefore it's true. That's a form of insanity, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah, well, it's thinking based on you reach a conclusion and then you hold to your conclusion regardless of whether the facts or the narrative or the story arrives at your conclusion. Elica, we could speak, I know, for hours and get lost, and I'm sure we'll do that at some point again. But I want to thank you so much for joining me. It was wonderful to speak to you. I'm going to put your article in the description below because I think everyone needs to go and read it and to gain get better insight into your story and your history, as well as what you know, the amazing work that you've been doing, but also the consequences and the experience that you've been having as a result of that. So thank you so much for joining me and have a good evening.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for joining us on the Jewish People's Podcast. You can find our podcast on your chosen streaming platform. That'll be Apple, Spotify, and YouTube. Tune in every Monday and Thursday. And in the meantime, have a great